Hello, friend. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to leave everything behind, not just a place, but a pull of weight, the very thing that holds you to the world, then maybe tonight you're in the right place. Some nights gravity feels heavier than it should. Your body sinks into the mattress. Your thoughts drift, but never quite float. And somewhere far above the clouds, there are people who've learned to live without it. People who close their eyes in a sleeping bag strapped to a wall, spinning around the earth 16 times before morning comes. They don't fall asleep. They float into it. Tonight we're going to drift quietly into their world, the world of astronauts, the humans who learn to float. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these quiet journeys, you might like to stay a while. You can gently tap the like button, subscribe, if you'd like more stories, told softly, and ring the little bell, not for noise, but so the next quiet night can find you again. Thank you for being here. Now, let's drift. Imagine this. You're strapped into a seat that hums with the breath of a million parts. The countdown feels like your own heartbeat, but louder and not quite yours anymore. 10, 9, the world below is about to become the world beneath. 8, 7. You wonder if you'll miss the weight of your own body. 6, 5. You wonder if the sky will feel like drowning or like waking. 4, 3, 2, 1. And then the push. Not gentle, not like dreams. A force so immense it presses you into the seat like the hand of something ancient. Your cheeks pull back, your vision tunnels. 3 times your body weight, 4 times, 5. Gravity doesn't let go quietly. It fights, it holds, and then silence. You unbuckle. You try to stand, but standing means nothing now. Your body drifts upward or maybe sideways, and you realize there is no up, there is no down. There is only this floating. For the first time in your life, you are weightless. Scientists say that astronauts describe this moment in similar ways: a strange lightness, a confusion in the muscles. The body keeps trying to stand to balance to find the ground, but the ground is gone. The inner ear, which has spent a lifetime detecting tilt and orientation, suddenly has no reference. The fluid inside it, usually pulled downward by gravity, now floats freely. Your brain receives signals that make no sense. It thinks you're falling. But you're not. You're just free. Some astronauts laugh, some cry, some simply stare, suspended as if the body is learning a new language and hasn't found the words yet. Chris Hadfield, the Canadian astronaut who spent nearly 6 months aboard the International Space Station, once said that the first sensation of microgravity felt like his body was playing a trick on him. He reached for a handhold expecting his arm to feel heavy. It didn't. He pushed off a wall expecting to stop. He didn't. He closed his eyes and felt like he was tumbling through space even though he was perfectly still. It takes the human body about 2 to 3 days to adapt, but even then, it never fully forgets. Every movement becomes deliberate. Every turn of the head sends the body drifting in the opposite direction. Newton's third law for every action, an equal and opposite reaction, becomes not a concept, but a constant companion. You don't walk in space. You float. You don't sit. You hover. You don't lie down to sleep. You strap yourself to a wall and hope your brain remembers how to dream. And it does. But differently. Research shows that astronauts' dreams change in space. Some report dreaming of flight, more often soaring over landscapes, diving through clouds, moving without effort. Others say they dream of falling less, perhaps because the body no longer knows what falling feels like, perhaps because in microgravity, falling and floating are the same thing. One astronaut described a recurring dream where he was swimming through the corridors of the space station, even though there was no water. Another dreamed she was walking on Earth, but every step sent her floating upward and she had to hold on to trees to stay grounded. The subconscious, it seems, is still catching up. But here's the strange part. Despite the disorientation, despite the nausea and confusion of those first days, many astronauts say they sleep better in space than they ever did on Earth. Not because it's more comfortable, not because it's quieter, but because the body freed from its own weight finally rests in a way it never could before. On Earth, even when we lie down, gravity presses us into the mattress. Our shoulders, our hips, our spine, all bearing the load of our own mass. In space, there is no pressure, no compression. The body simply exists, suspended as if held by something softer than air. Imagine that. Imagine lying down and feeling nothing beneath you. Not the mattress, not the floor, not even your own weight. Just the slow rhythmic breath of your chest rising and falling in the dark. But sleep in space is not simple. The International Space Station orbits the Earth once every 90 minutes. That means every 45 minutes the sun rises. 45 minutes later, it sets. 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets, every single day. The human body built over millennia to follow the rhythm of one sun, one moon, one rotation suddenly has no anchor. The circadian rhythm, the internal clock that tells us when to wake, when to sleep, when to feel hungry or alert, begins to fracture. Astronauts wear sleep masks. They use white noise machines. They dim the lights on a schedule, trying to trick the brain into believing in night. But the body knows. It feels the sunlight filtering through the station's windows. It feels the hum of machinery that never stops. It feels the absence of the one thing it has always relied on, the pull of the Earth. And so, astronauts learn to sleep in shifts. Some sleep 6 hours, some sleep 4. Some don't sleep at all for days, their minds too alert, their bodies too confused. NASA monitors their rest carefully. Sleep deprivation in space isn't just exhausting, it's dangerous. Mistakes happen, reflexes slow, decisions falter. But when they do sleep, when they finally close their eyes and let the body drift, they say it feels like sinking into something vast and quiet, a place where the mind can wander without boundaries, where thoughts don't fall in straight lines but spiral gently like dust in sunlight. One astronaut described it this way: sleeping in space feels like dissolving, like you're not a body anymore, just a presence. You forget where your arms are, you forget where the walls are, you just float. Maybe that's why so many of them miss it when they return. Because gravity, as much as we need it, is also a burden. It pulls us down. It makes us tired. It reminds us constantly that we are bound to the Earth. But in space, even if just for a moment, we are not bound. We are free. And freedom, even when it's strange and disorienting and sometimes terrifying, has a way of changing you. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone walking on the Earth, but as someone traveling through the universe on a small spinning rock. You begin to see the Earth differently too, not as the ground beneath your feet, but as a fragile glowing sphere floating in the blackness. A blue marble, a breath of life in an ocean of silence. Many astronauts talk about this shift in perspective. It has a name, the overview effect, but we'll come back to that. For now, just know this: once you've floated, once you've seen the Earth from above, once you've felt the absence of weight, you never quite feel the same way about standing. Some astronauts say they miss the weightlessness for years afterward. They dream about it. They wake up in the middle of the night and for just a second expect to float. They reach for a glass of water and are surprised when it doesn't hover. They lie in bed and feel the mattress pressing against their back, and they remember what it was like to sleep without it. Gravity becomes something you notice again. Every step, every breath, every moment your body pulls you downward. And maybe that's the gift of floating. Not that it frees you from weight, but that it helps you remember what weight feels like, what it means to be held by something, what it means to return. Because every astronaut who leaves eventually comes back. They float for months, sometimes a year. They learn to move without ground. They learn to sleep without stillness. They learn to live in a place where the rules of the body no longer apply. But then one day they descend. The capsule shakes. The heat shield glows. The parachutes bloom open. And gravity, patient and relentless, reaches up and pulls them home. Their feet touch the ground, and it feels heavier than they remember. But that's a story for later. For now, just imagine it. The quiet moment before the launch. The breath before the weightlessness. The last second when you are still tethered to the earth, still held by the pull of everything you've ever known. And then, you let go. You don't need to understand it all. Just rest. Let the thought drift with you. Let the idea of floating settle softly in the back of your mind. Because tonight, we're going to follow them. The humans who learned to float. The ones who left the ground and found something else. Not escape, not freedom, but a different kind of gravity. The kind that pulls you inward toward sleep, toward dreams, toward the quiet hum of the universe breathing. So close your eyes if you'd like, or keep them open. Either way, we're drifting now, and the next part of the journey is just beginning. When you close your eyes tonight, your body will know exactly what to do. It will sink into the bed. It will find a comfortable position. It will orient itself head-on, the pillow feet toward the end, gravity pulling everything downward as it always has. But what if there was no down? What if your body had to learn to sleep all over again, in a place where the rules it's followed since birth no longer apply? That's the first lesson astronauts learn in space. Not how to work, not how to eat, but how to sleep when the body forgets which way is up. Sleeping in space sounds peaceful, doesn't it? Floating weightless like drifting in water. No pressure on your shoulders. No need to roll over in the night. Just pure, effortless rest. But the body doesn't see it that way. At least not at first. The human body has spent millions of years evolving to sleep lying down. Horizontal. Supported. With gravity gently pressing us into something solid. Our cardiovascular system, our respiratory system, even our digestive system, all designed around the assumption that we will spend roughly a third of our lives in a reclined position, with blood pooling slightly in our legs, with organs settling into familiar places. In microgravity, none of that happens. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station sleep in what NASA calls crew quarters, small phone booth-sized compartments, with a sleeping bag attached to the wall. Not the floor, the wall. Because in space, walls and floors are the same thing. There is no inherent up or down. Only whatever orientation your body decides to call up in that moment. So they zip themselves into sleeping bags. They strap their arms down, or let them float freely in front of them like a sleepwalker suspended mid-reach. They close their eyes, and they wait. But the body resists. The first few nights in space, many astronauts report a strange, unshakable sensation, the feeling of falling. Their eyes are closed, they're strapped in, they're perfectly still. But the brain conditioned by a lifetime of gravity interprets the absence of weight as free fall. The same sensation you get in an elevator that drops too quickly. The same lurch in your stomach on a roller coaster. Except, it doesn't stop. Some astronauts wake up heart racing, gripping the sides of their sleeping bag. Some jolt awake, thinking they've rolled off the bed. Others simply lie there, float there, eyes wide open, waiting for the sensation to pass. It usually does after a few days. The brain eventually recalibrates. It stops expecting the pull of gravity. It stops waiting for the body to land. But even then, sleep in space is never quite like sleep on Earth. Scientists call this phenomenon spatial disorientation. The vestibular system, the part of the inner ear responsible for balance and spatial awareness, relies on gravity to function. Tiny calcium crystals called otoliths rest on hair-like sensors inside the ear. When you tilt your head, the crystals shift and your brain knows which way is down. In space, those crystals float. They don't shift. They don't settle. And so, the brain receives no information. It's like trying to read a compass with no magnetic north. The body simply doesn't know where it is. This is why astronauts often sleep with their arms floating in front of them, bent at the elbows, as if reaching for something. It's called the neutral body posture, the position the body naturally assumes in microgravity. Not curled up, not stretched out, somewhere in between. A posture that looks almost like surrender. And Maybe in a way it is. A surrender to the absence of weight. A surrender to the fact that the body for now belongs to a different kind of physics. But here's the strange part. Despite all of this, the disorientation, the sensation of falling, the arms floating in the air, many astronauts say they eventually sleep better in space than they ever did on Earth. Not because it's easier, but because it's softer. On Earth, even the best mattress creates pressure points. Your hips press down, your shoulders compress, your spine curves slightly to accommodate the weight of your own body. Over the course of a night, you shift positions dozens of times, unconsciously trying to relieve the pressure. In space, there is no pressure. The body simply floats suspended with no part of it bearing more weight than any other. Astronauts describe it as sleeping on a cloud, or better, sleeping as a cloud. No edges, no points of contact. Just the slow, even breath of the body at rest. Mike Massimino, a NASA astronaut who flew on 2 space shuttle missions to repair the Hubble Space Telescope, once said that sleeping in space felt like being held by something invisible. Not tight, not restrictive, just held. As if the universe itself had cradled him. But sleep in space is not just about comfort, it's about timing. The International Space Station orbits the Earth once every 90 minutes. That means every 45 minutes the sun rises. And 45 minutes after that, it sets. 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets, every single day. Think about that for a moment. Imagine trying to sleep when the sun keeps rising. Over and over, bright, blazing, relentless. Your body clock built over millennia to follow a 24-hour cycle suddenly thrown into chaos. The circadian rhythm, the internal biological clock that regulates sleep hunger, hormone release. Even mood depends on light, specifically on the presence and absence of light. When light hits the retina, it signals the brain to stop producing melatonin, the hormone that makes us sleepy. When darkness falls, melatonin rises and we begin to feel drowsy. But in space, light is constant. Even with the windows covered, even with the lights dimmed on a schedule, the body knows. It senses the sun, and it gets confused. Astronauts use sleep masks, thick padded NASA-designed masks that block out every trace of light. They use white noise machines to drown out the hum of the station's life support systems, the fans, the pumps, the endless mechanical breathing that never stops. They take melatonin supplements. They follow strict sleep schedules, going to bed at the same time every day, even though day no longer means what it used to. And still, many of them struggle. Research conducted on astronauts aboard the ISS shows that on average they sleep about 6 hours per night, significantly less than the recommended 8. Some nights it's less. Some nights it's fragmented, an hour here, 2 hours there, interrupted by alarms, by experiments, by the body's refusal to believe it's nighttime. One astronaut described lying in his sleeping bag, eyes closed, body still, mind racing. He could hear the station creaking. He could feel the faint vibration of the solar panels adjusting to catch the sunlight. He could sense the Earth spinning below him, even though he couldn't see it. And sleep, which had always come easily on the ground, felt impossibly far away. But then after weeks of this, something shifted. His body stopped fighting. It stopped waiting for gravity. It stopped expecting the sun to behave. And sleep, when it finally came, fell deeper than it ever had before. He described it as falling into a well of quiet, a place where thoughts didn't spiral, but simply dissolved, where the mind, freed from the constant pull of the body, could wander without resistance. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe sleeping in space isn't about learning to rest without gravity. Maybe it's about learning to let go of the body entirely, to stop expecting it to behave the way it always has, to trust that even without weight, even without orientation, even without the familiar pull of the Earth, rest will come. Because it does, eventually. Astronauts' dreams change too. Studies suggest that people in microgravity dream more vividly, more frequently. Some dream of flying, soaring over cities, diving through clouds. Others dream of swimming, of moving through water without effort. The brain, deprived of its usual sensory input, seems to fill the gap with motion, with freedom. One astronaut reported dreaming that she was back on Earth walking through a park, but every step she took sent her floating upward, and she had to grab onto trees, lampposts, anything she could reach just to stay grounded. Even in her dreams, her brain hadn't forgotten. It was still adjusting. Another astronaut dreamed he was underwater, but breathing normally. He swam through the corridors of the space station, even though there was no water. Everything moved slowly, gracefully, as if the air itself had thickened into something soft and forgiving. These dreams aren't random. They're the brain's way of making sense of a sensory experience it was never designed for. The body is floating, but the mind doesn't have a word for it. So, it borrows from memory. It reaches for the closest approximation, flying, swimming, floating. And when astronauts wake, they sometimes forget where they are. They open their eyes and see the curved wall of their sleeping compartment, the soft blue glow of the station's nightlights, the silent suspension of their own arms in front of them. And for just a moment, they wonder if they're still dreaming. But they're not. They're awake. They're alive. They're 250 miles above the Earth, moving at 17,500 miles per hour, circling the planet 16 times a day, sleeping in a place where up and down are just suggestions. And somehow, impossibly, they've learned to rest. Not perfectly, not easily, but deeply. In a way that perhaps only someone who's been weightless can understand. Because sleep at its core is about surrender. It's about letting go. It's about trusting that the body, even when it doesn't understand where it is, will find its way back to stillness. And in space where there is no ground to return to, where falling and floating are the same thing, sleep becomes something else. Not an escape from the body, but a return to something deeper, something quieter. A place where the mind can finally stop orienting itself and just be. So, tonight when you close your eyes, maybe think about them. The astronauts floating in the dark, arms bent, bodies suspended, hearts beating steadily in the silence, sleeping in a place where the world doesn't pull them down. And maybe you'll feel a little lighter too. But sleeping without gravity is only part of the story. Because while astronauts learn to rest in the weightlessness, their bodies are changing in ways they can't see, ways that don't wait for them to adjust, ways that begin the moment gravity lets go. Your body is not designed for space. It's designed for dirt, for weight, for the constant pull of a planet beneath your feet. And when you take that pull away, when you float weightless free, the body doesn't celebrate. It panics. Quietly, slowly. Cell by cell, system by system. It begins to change in ways you can't see, until one morning you look in the mirror and barely recognize the face staring back. Puffy, swollen, like you've been crying or haven't slept in days. Except, you have slept. You've rested. But your body has been working against itself, trying to make sense of a world that no longer makes sense. This is what happens when gravity lets go. Imagine your circulatory system as a river. On Earth, gravity pulls the water, your blood downward, pooling it slightly in your legs and feet. That's why after standing for hours, your ankles might swell. That's why, when you lie down at night, the blood redistributes, flowing back toward your heart, your lungs, your brain. Your body has spent a lifetime managing this flow. Your heart pumps harder to push blood upward against gravity. The veins in your legs have one-way valves to prevent backflow. Your capillaries adjust their pressure based on whether you're standing, sitting, or lying down. It's an elegant system refined over millions of years of evolution. But it only works if gravity is present. In space, there is no down for the blood to pool toward, so it doesn't. Instead, it redistributes evenly throughout the body. Or rather, it shifts upward toward the chest, the neck, the head. Suddenly, the upper body is receiving more blood than it's used to, and the lower body is receiving less. Scientists estimate that about 2 liters of fluid, roughly half a gallon, shifts from the legs to the upper body within the first few hours of microgravity. 2 liters. That's a significant amount of fluid suddenly pressing into areas that aren't accustomed to it. The result? What astronauts call puffy face syndrome, or more formally, moon face. Their faces swell, their sinuses fill with fluid, their necks thicken. Some describe feeling congested as if they have a cold that never quite clears. Others say their heads feel heavy, pressurized, even though they're weightless. One astronaut compared it to hanging upside down for 6 months. And in a way, that's exactly what's happening. The body, confused by the absence of gravity, treats microgravity as if the astronaut is perpetually inverted. Blood rushes to the head, the heart still pumping as if it needs to fight. Gravity pushes too much fluid upward, and the brain, receiving signals it doesn't understand, simply tries to adapt. But adaptation takes time, and in the meantime, the body changes. The legs, deprived of their usual blood volume, begin to shrink. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly over weeks and months, the muscles atrophy. The calves, once firm and strong, become thinner. The thighs lose mass. Astronauts often joke that they return from space with bird legs, skinny, fragile like twigs that might snap under weight. And it's not just muscle, it's bone too. On Earth, your bones are constantly remodeling themselves. Osteoblasts build new bone tissue. Osteoclasts break down old bone tissue. It's a delicate balance maintained by the stress that gravity places on the skeleton. Every step you take, every time you stand, every time you lift something, your bones respond by reinforcing themselves. But in space, there is no stress, no weight, no reason for the bones to stay strong. So they don't. Astronauts lose bone density at a rate of about 1 to 2% per month. That might not sound like much, but over the course of a 6-month mission, it adds up. 12%, in some cases more. The bones in the hips, the spine, the legs, the ones that bear the most weight on Earth, lose density the fastest. It's similar to what happens to people with osteoporosis, except it's accelerated, compressed into months instead of years. NASA has tried everything to slow this process. Astronauts aboard the ISS exercise for 2 hours every day. They run on treadmills equipped with harnesses that pull them downward, simulating gravity. They lift weights on machines designed to create resistance in microgravity. They do resistance training, squats, deadlifts, anything to convince their bones that they still need to be strong. And it helps, a little. But it doesn't stop the loss entirely. Scott Kelly, the NASA astronaut who spent nearly a year aboard the ISS, lost significant bone density in his hips and lower spine. Years after returning to Earth, some of that density still hadn't fully recovered. His body had adapted to space so thoroughly that it struggled to remember how to be on Earth. But bone loss isn't the only concern. There's also the heart. On Earth, the heart is a powerful muscle constantly working against gravity to pump blood upward to the brain. In space, it doesn't need to work as hard. The blood flows freely without resistance. And so, like any muscle that isn't being used to its full capacity, the heart begins to weaken. Studies show that the heart of an astronaut in space becomes slightly smaller, slightly less efficient. The muscle fibers atrophy. The walls of the heart thin. It's not dangerous in microgravity, the heart is still doing its job. But when the astronaut returns to Earth, when gravity suddenly demands that the heart pump harder again, the body struggles. Many astronauts experience dizziness upon landing. Some can't stand without fainting. Their hearts, weakened by months of disuse, can't immediately adjust to the demands of gravity. It takes weeks, sometimes months, for the heart to regain its strength. And then there's vision. This one surprised NASA. For years, astronauts had been reporting subtle changes in their eyesight after returning from space. Blurriness, difficulty focusing. Some needed reading glasses for the first time. Others found that their prescription had changed. At first, doctors assumed it was temporary, a side effect of the fluid shift, something that would resolve itself once the astronauts were back on Earth. But it didn't. Further research revealed something unsettling. The increased fluid pressure in the head wasn't just causing swelling. It was pressing against the back of the eyeball, flattening it slightly. In some cases, it was causing the optic nerve to swell. Scientists now call this condition CHIP, visual impairment, and intracranial pressure syndrome. And in some astronauts, the damage is permanent. Imagine that. You spend 6 months in space conducting experiments, repairing equipment, living out a dream that few people will ever experience. And when you return, your vision is worse. Not because of an accident, not because of a mistake, but simply because your body, placed in an environment it wasn't designed for, began to break down in ways you couldn't predict. The human body is resilient. But it's not invincible. There's also the immune system. Research suggests that microgravity weakens immune function. White blood cells become less effective. The body's ability to fight off infections diminishes. Wounds heal more slowly. Even dormant viruses like the chickenpox virus that causes shingles can reactivate in space. Astronauts are screened carefully before launch. They're kept in quarantine to minimize exposure to illness. But even so, many report getting sick in space. Colds that linger, rashes that appear without explanation. A general sense of being run down, as if the body is constantly fighting something invisible. And maybe it is. Maybe the stress of adapting to microgravity combined with the psychological strain of isolation, the disrupted sleep, the constant hum of machinery, the 16 sunrises a day, maybe all of it adds up. Maybe the body, stretched thin by the demands of survival in an alien environment, simply doesn't have the resources to maintain everything at once. So, it prioritizes. It keeps the heart beating. It keeps the lungs breathing. It keeps the brain functioning. But the smaller things, the bone density, the muscle mass, the immune response, the vision, those start to slip. One astronaut described it this way: living in space feels like your body is aging and fast forward. You're still young, still strong, but your bones feel like an old person's. Your muscles feel like an old person's. Your heart feels tired, and you realize this is what it's like to be fragile. But here's the strange part. Despite all of this, the bone loss, the muscle atrophy, the swollen face, the weakened heart, the blurred vision, many astronauts say they'd go back, without hesitation. Because the body, as much as it struggles, also adapts. It learns. It finds new ways to function. And in doing so, it reveals something profound about what it means to be human. We are not fixed. We are not unchanging. We are malleable, adaptable, capable of surviving in places we were never meant to survive in. Not comfortably, not without cost. But we survive nonetheless. And maybe that's the real lesson of microgravity. Not that the body is weak, but that it's stronger than we think. Strong enough to endure months of weightlessness, even as it changes in ways we can't control. Strong enough to return to Earth, even when the return is harder than the departure. Strong enough to remember gravity even after forgetting it for a while. Your body is not designed for space, but it can learn, it can adapt, it can carry you through places you were never meant to go, at a cost, yes, but also with a kind of quiet resilience that's easy to overlook. So tonight as you lie in bed, feel the weight of your body pressing into the mattress. Feel the pull of gravity holding you down. And know that somewhere far above, there are people whose bodies are changing slowly, silently, in ways they can't see. Their bones thinning, their muscles shrinking, their hearts learning to beat differently. But they're still there, still floating, still human. And when they return, their bodies will remember, slowly, painfully. But they will remember. Yet even as their bodies change, something else shifts too. Something harder to measure, harder to see. Because microgravity doesn't just alter bones and blood. It alters the way astronauts experience their own bodies, the way they move, the way they feel. And sometimes in those first days, the way they lose control entirely. There's a moment in the first hours of weightlessness when the body stops cooperating, when the stomach turns, when the head spins, When everything you thought you knew about balance, about orientation, about simply existing in your own skin fails, and then you vomit in zero gravity, which is not like vomiting on Earth, not even close, because on Earth gravity pulls everything down. In space, it just floats. Welcome to the most humbling, most universally feared experience of spaceflight. The thing that even the most decorated astronauts, the ones with perfect records and nerves of steel, cannot escape. Space adaptation syndrome. Or, as everyone quietly calls it, space sickness. The early days in orbit are not gentle. They're not poetic. They're messy, disorienting, and profoundly humbling. Because the body, no matter how well trained, no matter how prepared, simply does not understand what's happening. And it reacts the only way it knows how. It revolts. Scientists estimate that between 60 and 80% of astronauts experience some form of space sickness during their first few days in orbit. Nausea, dizziness, cold sweats, headaches, and yes, vomiting. Lots of it. It doesn't matter how fit you are. It doesn't matter how much you've trained. It doesn't even matter if you've never been motion sick in your entire life. In space, your body is operating on rules it doesn't recognize. And the disconnect between what your eyes see and what your inner ear feels is so profound that the brain, overwhelmed, simply shuts down non-essential functions, including your ability to keep your lunch down. The vestibular system, the delicate structure in your inner ear responsible for balance, is built on the assumption that gravity exists. Inside each ear, there are 3 semicircular canals filled with fluid. When you move your head, the fluid shifts, bending tiny hair cells that send signals to your brain. Up, down, left, right, tilted, turning. But in microgravity, the fluid doesn't shift the way it's supposed to. It floats aimlessly, sending confusing, contradictory signals. Your eyes tell you you're still. Your inner ear tells you you're tumbling. Your brain tries to reconcile the two and fails. And when the brain can't make sense of sensory input, it often assumes one thing: you've been poisoned. So it tries to expel the poison by making you throw up. It's a survival mechanism, a deeply primitive one. But in space, it's not helpful. It's just unfortunate. Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, reportedly felt nauseous during his historic flight in 1961. He didn't mention it publicly at the time. Soviet propaganda preferred heroes without weakness. But years later, documents revealed that he experienced dizziness and disorientation. He completed his mission. He smiled for the cameras, but inside, his body was struggling. John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth, also felt the effects. He described a strange, persistent sensation of tumbling, even though he was strapped into his seat perfectly still. His body kept insisting he was spinning. His eyes insisted he wasn't. The conflict made him queasy for hours, but it wasn't until the Apollo missions that the reality of space sickness became undeniable. Frank Borman, commander of Apollo 8, the first mission to orbit the moon, became violently ill during the flight. He vomited. He had diarrhea. He felt dizzy, disoriented, feverish. Mission Control was so concerned, they considered aborting the mission. But Borman insisted he was fine, just adapting, just adjusting. And eventually, he was. After about 24 hours, the symptoms faded. His body recalibrated. His brain stopped interpreting microgravity as poison, and he went on to complete one of the most important missions in human history. But the vomit that stayed, floating, a small, unfortunate cloud of bile suspended in the cabin until someone could clean it up. And that's the thing about vomiting in space. On Earth, gravity pulls it down, into a toilet, into a bag, onto the floor. It's unpleasant, yes, but it's contained. In space, it doesn't fall, it drifts. It breaks apart into tiny droplets. It clings to surfaces. It floats toward air vents, toward equipment, toward other crew members. It becomes everyone's problem. Astronauts aboard the early space shuttle missions were given emesis bags, essentially vomit bags with a sticky rim that sealed around the mouth to prevent leakage. But even with the bags, the process was humiliating. You're floating nauseous dizzy, trying to hold a bag to your face while your body convulses and your crewmates try very hard to look away. Some astronauts describe space sickness as the worst motion sickness they've ever experienced. Worse than seasickness. Worse than car sickness. Worse than any roller coaster. Because it doesn't stop. It doesn't ease when you close your eyes or lie down. It just persists relentlessly until your brain finally accepts the new reality. And tears don't help. If you cry in space, the tears don't roll down your cheeks. They can't. There's no gravity to pull them downward. Instead, they pool around your eyes, forming a small, wobbling sphere of salt water that clings to your face. Canadian astronaut Chris Hadfield demonstrated this in a video from the ISS. He deliberately made himself tear up, not from sadness, but from irritation by rubbing his eyes, and the tears simply accumulated. A small, glistening blob on the surface of his eye, refusing to fall. He had to wipe them away manually, otherwise they would have stayed there, blurring his vision, growing larger with each blink. It's a strange image, isn't it? Tears that don't fall, grief or pain or nausea expressed but trapped, suspended. One astronaut described feeling nauseated and starting to tear up from the strain. The tears pooled, the nausea worsened, and for a moment she felt utterly, profoundly helpless. Her body was malfunctioning in ways she couldn't control. And she was 250 miles from the nearest bathroom, the nearest bed, the nearest place that felt like ground. But here's the remarkable part. Almost everyone adapts. Within 2 to 3 days, the nausea fades, the dizziness subsides, the brain, stubborn and resilient, finally accepts that this is the new normal, that microgravity is not poison, that the body is not falling, that everything impossibly is fine. The vestibular system recalibrates. It stops relying on gravity to orient itself. It starts using visual cues instead. Walls handholds the positions of crewmates. The brain rewires itself quickly, efficiently, the way it does after any major sensory disruption. And once that happens, most astronauts feel better than they've ever felt. The nausea disappears entirely. The headaches stop. The body, finally convinced that it's safe, settles into a strange, weightless comfort. But not everyone adapts at the same rate. Some astronauts adjust within a day. They wake up on their second morning in space feeling perfectly fine, ready to work. Others take a week. Some experience lingering symptoms for the entire mission, mild nausea, occasional dizziness, a constant low-level queasiness that never quite goes away. And then there's Jake Garn. In 1985, Senator Jake Garn of Utah flew aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery as part of a congressional fact-finding mission. He was not a professional astronaut, he was a politician, and he became legendarily catastrophically space sick. For days he could barely function. He vomited repeatedly. He couldn't eat. He couldn't work. He spent most of the mission strapped into his seat, pale, miserable, waiting for it to end. NASA astronauts, with their dry sense of humor, began using his name as a unit of measurement. 1 Garn equaled the maximum possible level of space sickness. If you were mildly nauseous, you were at 0.5 Garns. If you were vomiting uncontrollably, unable to move, wishing for death, you were at 1 full Garn. It's a cruel joke, but also a reminder. Space does not care who you are. It does not care about your training, your rank, your experience. It treats everyone the same, with indifference, with physics, with the cold, unyielding reality that the human body was never meant to be here. And yet, here we are, floating, adapting, vomiting occasionally, but surviving nonetheless. Because that's what humans do. We push into places we don't belong. We endure discomfort. We wait for our bodies to catch up. And eventually they do. Not perfectly, not without cost. But they do. The first cosmonauts and astronauts didn't know if space sickness would ever go away. They didn't know if the human body could adapt to microgravity at all. They were guinea pigs, pioneers, test subjects in an experiment with no precedent. And they succeeded. They proved that the body, given time, can adjust to almost anything, even the absence of weight, even the confusion of floating, even the humiliation of vomiting into a bag while your crewmates pretend not to notice. It's not glamorous, it's not what you see in the movies, but it's real. And in its own way, it's profound. Because space sickness is a reminder, a humbling, uncomfortable reminder that we are still animals, still bound by biology, still limited by the systems that evolved over millions of years to keep us alive on a planet with gravity. We can train, we can prepare, we can build rockets and space stations and dream of Mars, but we cannot escape the body. We cannot bypass adaptation. We have to go through it, messily, uncomfortably, one nauseous day at a time. And on the other side of that discomfort, there's something else. Not just relief, but a kind of quiet pride. The knowledge that you survived the transition, that your body, despite everything learned, a new way to exist. So tonight, if you've ever felt dizzy or nauseous or disoriented, if you've ever felt your body rebel against you for reasons you didn't understand, maybe you'll feel a small kinship with them. The astronauts floating in the dark stomachs, churning tears, pooling, waiting for the sickness to pass. It always does, eventually. And when it does, when the body finally stops fighting and starts adapting, something shifts. The physical discomfort fades, but the psychological reality of life in space begins to settle in. And with it comes a different kind of challenge, not one of nausea or balance, but one of the simplest, strangest, most necessary acts of survival: eating, drinking, and staying clean in a place where nothing falls and everything floats. Think about the last meal you ate, the weight of the fork in your hand, the way the food stayed on the plate, the way water poured from a glass into your mouth, pulled downward by gravity, predictable and simple. Now, imagine none of that works. Imagine every bite, every sip, every basic act of nourishment becomes a careful negotiation with physics. Where crumbs don't fall, they fly. Where water doesn't pour, it floats. Where eating isn't automatic anymore. It's a skill you have to relearn. In space, the simplest routines become rituals. Small acts of survival performed carefully, quietly, in a place where nothing behaves the way it should. On Earth, we take eating for granted. You open the fridge, you prepare food, you sit down, you eat. Gravity keeps everything in place. The food on your fork, the drink in your cup, the crumbs on your plate. It's effortless, invisible. You don't even think about it. But in space, eating requires attention, patience, and a willingness to accept that meals will never feel quite the same. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station don't have fresh food, not usually. Not unless a resupply mission has just arrived, and even then, fresh fruits and vegetables last only a few days before they spoil. Most of their meals come in pouches, vacuum-sealed, freeze-dried, rehydrated with hot water, chicken teriyaki, macaroni and cheese, scrambled eggs, shrimp cocktail, all of it processed, preserved, designed to last months without refrigeration. The food is nutritious, carefully balanced, calibrated to provide the right amount of calories, protein, vitamins, minerals. But taste, texture, the sensory experience of eating, that's harder to preserve. Many astronauts report that food in space tastes bland, muted, as if someone has turned down the volume on flavor. And in a way they have. The fluid shift that causes puffy face syndrome also affects the sinuses. The nasal passages become congested, swollen, reducing the sense of smell. And since smell accounts for about 80% of what we perceive as taste, meals in space often feel disappointingly flavorless. It's similar to eating with a bad cold. You can taste sweetness, saltiness, bitterness, the basic sensations detected by the tongue, but the complexity, the richness, the nuance of flavor, that's dulled, distant. So, astronauts compensate. They load their food with condiments, hot sauce, wasabi, Anything with a strong, sharp flavor that can cut through the congestion. Shrimp cocktail with its tangy, spicy sauce is one of the most requested meals aboard the ISS. Not because shrimp is inherently more delicious in space, but because the sauce is strong enough to taste. And then there's the challenge of actually getting the food into your mouth. On Earth, you can set a plate down on a table. You can rest your fork on the edge. You can pour yourself a drink and leave the glass sitting there, confident it won't drift away. In space, nothing stays where you put it. So, astronauts use trays with Velcro strips and bungee cords. The food pouches attached to the tray. The tray attaches to the wall or to their lap or to the edge of a workstation. Every item is secured because if you let go of something, a fork, a pouch, a piece of bread, it floats. And floating food is not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. Crumbs, for instance, are a serious problem. On Earth, crumbs fall to the floor. You sweep them up. In space, they hover. They drift into air vents. They get into equipment. They float into people's eyes, noses, mouths. They can damage sensitive electronics if they get into the wrong place. That's why bread is banned on the ISS. Too many crumbs. Instead, astronauts use tortillas. Soft, pliable, crumb-free. They spread peanut butter or tuna salad on a tortilla, roll it up, and eat it carefully, making sure nothing escapes. Every bite is deliberate, controlled. You don't take a big careless mouthful. You don't shake crumbs off your hands. You eat slowly, methodically, aware that any stray particle could become someone else's problem. And drinking? That's even stranger. On Earth, you tilt a glass. Gravity pulls the liquid toward your mouth. Simple, elegant. But in space, liquid doesn't pour. It clings to the sides of the container, held by surface tension. If you tip a cup of water upside down in microgravity, nothing comes out. The water just sits there, suspended, refusing to fall. So, astronauts drink from pouches with straws, or from special containers with valves that release liquid only when you sip. They squeeze the pouch, gently coaxing the water into their mouths. Too hard, and you get a mouthful of liquid all at once. Too soft, and nothing happens. And if you accidentally release a droplet of water into the cabin, it doesn't fall, it hovers. A perfect wobbling sphere reflecting the lights of the station, drifting slowly through the air until someone catches it with a towel. Russian cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev once described watching a droplet of juice float past him during a meal. He reached out to catch it missed and watched it drift lazily across the module. Another crew member tried to grab it, missed. It floated for several minutes, slowly moving toward an air vent before someone finally managed to snatch it with a paper towel. It became a game, a small, absurd moment of levity in the midst of routine, but also a reminder. In space, even water doesn't obey. And then there's the question of hygiene. How do you stay clean in a place where water doesn't flow? On Earth, we shower. Water falls from above, runs down our bodies, washes away dirt and sweat and the accumulated grime of the day. It's simple, automatic. We don't think about how much we rely on gravity to rinse us clean. But in space, there are no showers. Not on the ISS, not anymore. The early space station Skylab Mir had experimental shower systems. Small enclosed chambers where astronauts could spray themselves with water scrub and then vacuum up the floating droplets before they escaped into the rest of the station. But the process was slow, complicated. It used too much water, and it didn't work very well. The water clung to the skin instead of rinsing off. Soap didn't wash away, it just spread around. And after 15 minutes of effort, astronauts often felt only marginally cleaner than when they started. So, NASA abandoned the idea. Now, astronauts aboard the ISS clean themselves the way campers do, with damp towels and no-rinse soap. They wet a towel with warm water from a dispenser. They add a small squirt of liquid soap that doesn't require rinsing. They wipe themselves down, face, arms, torso, legs. Carefully, methodically, making sure not to let the towel get too wet or droplets will start breaking free and floating away. It's not a shower, it's not even close, but it works, mostly. Astronauts describe feeling perpetually slightly unclean. Not dirty exactly, but not fresh either. There's a stickiness to the skin, a faint lingering sense of sweat and oils that never quite disappears. And hair. That's another challenge. Without gravity, hair doesn't fall. It floats. It sticks out in all directions unless you tie it back or cut it short. Washing hair in space requires a special no-rinse shampoo. You wet your hair with a damp towel massage in the shampoo and then towel it dry. No water running through it, no rinsing. Just a chemical approximation of cleanliness. One astronaut described it as feeling like your hair is never truly clean. It's always a little greasy, a little stiff. You get used to it, but you never stop missing the simple pleasure of standing under running water. And then there's the bathroom. On Earth, toilets work because gravity pulls waste downward. In space, there's no downward. So the ISS uses a vacuum system, a toilet that sucks waste away using airflow. It's small, much smaller than a regular toilet. Astronauts have to position themselves carefully using footholds and handholds to stay in place. They have to create a tight seal, or the suction doesn't work properly. And they have to aim carefully because in microgravity, waste doesn't always cooperate. For liquid waste, there's a hose with a funnel. Astronauts position the funnel, turn on the suction, and let the airflow pull the urine into a collection system. The liquid is then processed, filtered, and recycled into drinking water. Yes, drinking water, it sounds unpleasant. But the recycling system is remarkably effective. The water that comes out is cleaner than most tap water on Earth. Astronauts joke about it. Yesterday's coffee is today's coffee. But it's true. In space, nothing is wasted. Everything is reclaimed, purified, reused. For solid waste, the process is even more delicate. Astronauts position themselves over a small opening about the size of a dinner plate. Airflow pulls the waste into a sealed bag. Afterward, they seal the bag, compress it, and store it in a waste compartment. Eventually, it's loaded onto a cargo ship and burned up during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. It's not dignified, it's not comfortable, but it works. Astronauts say that using the bathroom in space is one of the most awkward parts of the experience. Not because it's physically difficult, but because there's no privacy. The walls are thin, the station is small, everyone knows when you're in the bathroom, and everyone can hear. It's humbling. A reminder that even in the vastness of space, even as you orbit the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour, you're still just a human, still bound by biology, still needing to eat, drink, wash, and use the bathroom. These rituals, these small, careful acts of maintaining the body, become strangely important, not just for survival, but for preserving a sense of normalcy, of humanity. Because in space where everything is strange, where nothing works the way it should, these routines ground you. They remind you that you're still yourself, still a person with needs, still someone who has to eat breakfast and brush their teeth and wash their face, even if the breakfast comes from a pouch, even if brushing your teeth means swallowing the toothpaste because there's nowhere to spit. Even if washing your face means wiping it with a damp towel and hoping for the best. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and in its own way, it's beautiful. Because it shows how adaptable we are, how willing we are to change our habits, our expectations, our definitions of comfort, just to exist in a place we were never meant to be. So, tonight when you eat dinner, when you take a shower, when you use the bathroom, maybe take a moment to appreciate how easy it is. How effortlessly gravity keeps everything in place. How simple it is to pour a glass of water and watch it fall into the cup. Because somewhere far above, there are people who can't do any of that. People who eat from pouches, who drink through straws, who clean themselves with towels and no-rinse soap. And they do it every day, without complaint. Because that's the cost of floating. That's the price of leaving Earth. And for them, it's worth it. But even with all the careful rituals, even with the routines that keep the body fed and clean, there's something else astronauts must endure. Something quieter, harder to measure, harder to prepare for. Because after weeks of floating, after months of staring out at the endless black, the body begins to feel the weight of something gravity can't touch. The weight of being so far from everyone. Imagine being farther from other people than anyone has ever been. Not just physically distant, but separated by something no car, no plane, no boat can cross. Separated by the edge of the atmosphere itself. You look out the window and see 8 billion people down there living their lives, breathing the same air, walking on the same ground. And you're up here, alone, floating in a metal tube, watching them from a distance so vast it makes your chest feel hollow. This is the loneliness astronauts don't talk about much. Not in interviews, not in press conferences, but it's there, quiet, persistent. A weight that has nothing to do with gravity. Space is not just a physical journey, it's a psychological one. And the mind, it turns out, is just as vulnerable to the void as the body. Astronauts are carefully selected, rigorously trained. They're tested for emotional stability, stress tolerance, the ability to work in isolation. They undergo psychological evaluations that last months. They practice in confined spaces and simulations, in environments designed to mimic the isolation of spaceflight. But no amount of training can fully prepare you for the reality of being 250 miles above everyone you've ever known. The International Space Station is about the size of a 5-bedroom house. But it's not a house. It's a workspace, a laboratory. Every surface is covered with equipment, cables, storage compartments. There are no empty rooms, no quiet corners, no place to truly be alone. And yet, paradoxically, astronauts often describe feeling profoundly alone. It's not the physical isolation that gets to them, not at first. It's the psychological separation. The knowledge that everyone they love is down there unreachable, living in a world that keeps turning without them. They can communicate, of course. Email, video calls, messages from family and friends. But there's a delay, a distance, a sense that the conversations, no matter how warm, are happening across a gap that can't be fully bridged. One astronaut described calling home to talk to his children. The connection was clear. He could see their faces, hear their voices. But when his daughter held up a drawing she'd made, he couldn't reach out and touch it. When his son asked when he was coming home, he could only say soon and watch the disappointment flicker across the child's face. It's a strange kind of presence. You're there, but not there. Close enough to see, but too far to touch. And over time, that distance starts to feel heavier. Psychologists call this Earth out of view phenomenon, the sense of disconnection that comes from being physically removed from the planet. It's not just homesickness, it's deeper than that. It's the realization that life is continuing without you, that birthdays are happening, holidays are passing, your family is sitting down to dinner and you're not there. Your friends are meeting for coffee and your chair is empty. You're still alive, still working, still part of their lives in theory. But in practice, you've become a voice on a screen, a name in an email, a person who exists mostly in memory. And that hurts in a way that's hard to describe. Astronauts talk about missing the strangest things, not the big obvious ones like holidays or birthdays, but the small everyday moments, the sound of rain on a roof, the smell of fresh bread, the feeling of wind on their face, the weight of a hug. One astronaut said she missed hearing birds, just that, the casual ambient sound of birds chirping outside a window. It's something you don't think about on Earth. It's just there, part of the background noise of life. But in space there are no birds, no wind, no rustling leaves, just the hum of machinery, constant, unchanging. Another astronaut said he missed the smell of grass. He had never thought of it as something he needed. But after months in space where the air is filtered and recycled and smells faintly metallic, he found himself craving the scent of a freshly mowed lawn. Something green, something alive. These are not rational desires. They're not needs. but they're deeply, profoundly human. And in their absence, astronauts begin to realize how much of our sense of home is built on sensory details. The things we see, hear, smell, touch. The things that tell us on a level deeper than thought that we belong. And in space, none of those things exist. There's also the challenge of living in close quarters with the same small group of people for months at a time. On Earth, if you're frustrated with someone, you can leave. Go for a walk, spend time in another room, create distance. In space, there's nowhere to go. The ISS typically houses 6 people, 6 personalities, 6 sleep schedules, 6 sets of habits, preferences, quirks. And they're all confined to a space about the size of a Boeing 747 with no privacy, no escape, no ability to step outside for fresh air. Studies suggest that interpersonal conflict is one of the most significant psychological challenges of long-duration spaceflight. Not physical danger, not equipment failure, but the slow grinding stress of living with the same people day after day with no break. Small annoyances become magnified. Someone chews too loudly. Someone doesn't clean up after themselves. Someone plays music you don't like. On Earth, these things are minor, forgivable. But in space where there's no release, no outlet, they fester. Russian cosmonauts aboard the Mir space station in the 1990s reported significant tension among crew members during long missions. Arguments over work schedules, disputes over who used too much water, resentment over minor slights that under normal circumstances would have been forgotten immediately. In one instance, 2 cosmonauts stopped speaking to each other entirely. They communicated only through a 3rd crew member. They worked in separate modules. They avoided eye contact. For weeks, they lived in the same small space, utterly estranged. Mission control couldn't intervene. They could only watch, monitor, and hope the situation didn't escalate. It didn't. Eventually, the mission ended. The cosmonauts returned to Earth. And afterward, when asked about the conflict, both men said the same thing: it wasn't personal. It was the isolation, the confinement, the relentless, inescapable proximity. NASA has learned from these experiences. They now screen astronauts carefully for interpersonal compatibility. They provide conflict resolution training. They encourage crew members to talk openly about frustrations before they build up. They even schedule private psychological consultations with counselors on Earth. But even with all these precautions, the strain is real. Because humans need space. Not just physical space, though, that helps, but psychological space. The ability to step away, to be alone with your thoughts, to exist even briefly outside the awareness of others. And on the ISS, that's almost impossible. There's also the issue of special occasions, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. On Earth, these days are marked with rituals, gatherings, cake, gifts, the presence of loved ones. In space, they pass quietly. Astronauts try to celebrate. Mission Control sometimes sends care packages with small treats. Crew members might gather for a meal and sing happy birthday to a floating colleague. They might exchange small gifts they have brought from Earth, carefully rationed and saved for the right moment. But it's not the same. One astronaut described spending Christmas aboard the ISS. He video called his family, watched them open presents, listened to his children laugh. And when the call ended, he floated alone in his sleeping compartment, staring at the curved metal wall, trying not to cry. He wasn't sad exactly, just distant, removed, as if he were watching his own life from the outside, unable to participate. And yet, despite all of this, the isolation, the confinement, the missed birthdays and holidays, many astronauts describe experiencing something profound, something that changes them in ways they didn't expect. It's called the overview effect. The term was coined by author Frank White in 1987, but the phenomenon has been reported by astronauts since the earliest space flights. It's the cognitive shift that occurs when you see the Earth from space, not as a map, not as an abstract concept, but as a whole, a single fragile sphere floating in the blackness. Astronauts describe it as a moment of clarity, a sudden overwhelming realization that the Earth is not infinite, that the atmosphere, the thin blue line that separates life from the void, is shockingly delicate, that all of human history, every war, every empire, every conflict, every achievement has happened on that tiny spinning rock. And from space, the borders disappear. The divisions between countries, cultures, ideologies, they're invisible. There's just the Earth, blue and green and white, breathing, alive. Many astronauts say this experience is spiritual, not religious necessarily, but deeply, profoundly moving. It shifts their perspective on what matters, on what's worth fighting for, on how small and petty so many of our conflicts seem when viewed from that distance. Ron Garan, a NASA astronaut who spent time aboard the ISS, described looking out the window and feeling an almost unbearable sense of connection to everyone on Earth. He saw cities glowing in the night, storms swirling over oceans, rivers snaking through deserts, and he realized we're all on the same planet. We're all breathing the same air. We're all in the most literal sense in this together. It's a perspective that stays with them. Long after they return, long after the mission ends, they carry it with them quietly, like a secret they can't quite explain. But the overview effect doesn't erase the loneliness. It doesn't make the isolation easier. If anything, it makes it more poignant. Because you're experiencing something so profound, so beautiful, so life-changing, and there's no one there to share it with. Not really, you can try to describe it. You can send photos, videos, messages home. But words fail, images fail. The experience is too vast, too layered, too deeply felt to be communicated fully. So you carry it alone, and maybe that's part of the gift. Maybe the loneliness is what makes the beauty possible. Because in the absence of distraction, in the silence of the void, the mind opens. It sees differently. It feels differently. Astronauts often say that being in space forces you to confront yourself. Not just your physical limitations, but your emotional ones. Your fears, your regrets, your hopes. There's nowhere to hide. No distractions, no escape. You're just there, floating, thinking, feeling. And over time, that solitude, that profound, inescapable aloneness becomes something else. Not comfortable exactly, but meaningful. One astronaut described it this way: in space, you learn that you can be lonely and still be okay. That loneliness isn't emptiness. It's just space. And sometimes space is exactly what you need. So tonight, if you've ever felt lonely, if you've ever felt disconnected from the people around you, maybe you'll think of them. The astronauts floating 250 miles above the Earth, missing birthdays, missing holidays, missing the sound of rain and the smell of grass and the weight of a hug. They're lonely, but they're not lost. They're just far away, learning something the rest of us can't, seeing something we'll never see, and carrying the weight of that beauty and that distance with quiet grace. But loneliness is not the only challenge they face, because space is not just empty. It's not just silent. It's also dangerous in ways that are easy to forget, ways that don't announce themselves, ways that wait patient and invisible for a moment of carelessness. And when that moment comes, the consequences are swift, unforgiving, and sometimes impossible to escape. Space looks empty, peaceful, a vast silent expanse of darkness and stars. But it's not empty. It's filled with things you can't see, things that move faster than bullets, things that pass through metal, through skin, through bone, leaving invisible damage in their wake. And the worst part, you don't feel it. You don't hear it. You only know it's there because sometimes when you close your eyes, you see flashes of light that shouldn't exist. This is the quiet danger, the invisible threat, the thing astronauts live with every day even when everything seems calm. The universe is not safe. It tolerates us at best. And in space where there's no atmosphere to shield us, no magnetic field to deflect the worst of it, we are exposed, vulnerable, walking a tightrope between survival and catastrophe. On Earth, we're protected. The atmosphere absorbs most of the radiation from the sun and deep space. The magnetic field deflects charged particles, funneling them toward the poles, where they create the aurora, beautiful curtains of light that are essentially evidence of invisible danger being redirected away from us. But in space, there is no atmosphere, no magnetic field. Just you inside a thin metal shell, orbiting 250 miles above the surface, bathed in radiation. Scientists measure radiation exposure in units called sieverts. On Earth, the average person receives about 3 millisieverts per year from natural background radiation, cosmic rays, radon gas trace elements in soil and rock. It's so low, so constant that we don't even notice. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station receive about 150 millisieverts over the course of a 6-month mission. That's 50 times the annual dose of someone on Earth, compressed into half a year. And that's just on the ISS, which is still partially protected by Earth's magnetic field. Astronauts traveling to the Moon or Mars or deeper into space will face even higher doses, potentially life-threatening doses. Radiation doesn't just damage the body, it damages DNA. It increases the risk of cancer, it accelerates aging, it weakens the immune system. And the effects are cumulative. Every mission adds to the total. Every hour in space adds to the dose. NASA monitors astronaut exposure carefully. Each astronaut has a lifetime radiation limit based on age and gender. Once they reach that limit, they're grounded. No more missions. Not because they're unfit, but because the risk of cancer becomes too high to justify. Some astronauts retire before reaching their limit. Others push right up against it, squeezing in one last mission before they're forced to stop. It's a quiet calculation, a trade-off between the dream of spaceflight and the long-term cost to the body. And then there are the flashes. Astronauts aboard the Apollo missions to the Moon reported seeing strange brief bursts of light when they closed their eyes. White streaks, blue flickers, tiny sparks that appeared and vanished in an instant. At first they thought it was an optical illusion, a trick of the mind. But it kept happening, night after night. Every astronaut saw them. Scientists eventually realized what was causing it. Cosmic rays, high-energy particles from distant supernovae accelerated to near the speed of light, were passing through the spacecraft, through the astronauts' skulls, through their eyeballs, and striking the retina or optic nerve. The impact created a brief false signal that the brain interpreted as light. In other words, astronauts were seeing radiation, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. The light wasn't real, but the particles were. And they were passing through the astronauts' bodies constantly, silently, invisibly. On Earth, the atmosphere stops most cosmic rays. In space, nothing does. It's unsettling, isn't it? To know that something is moving through you right now, even though you can't feel it. To know that your body is being altered cell by cell in ways you can't prevent. Astronauts learn to live with it. They have to. There's no other choice. But radiation isn't the only invisible threat. Fire in space behaves differently than it does on Earth, and that difference makes it far more dangerous. On Earth, fire burns upward. Hot air rises carrying smoke and heat with it. Cool air rushes in from below, feeding the flames. It's a predictable pattern. We build fire alarms that detect rising smoke. We teach people to stay low where the air is clearer. But in microgravity, there is no up. Hot air doesn't rise because there's no gravity to make it lighter than cool air. Fire doesn't climb. It spreads in all directions, forming a strange spherical shape, a ball of flame that expands outward, consuming oxygen, producing carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, but not dispersing the smoke. The result: smoke doesn't rise. It lingers. It accumulates. And in a confined space like the ISS, where air circulation depends on fans and ventilation systems, smoke can fill the cabin quickly, silently, without warning. And there's nowhere to run. In 1997, a fire broke out aboard the Russian space station Mir. It started in an oxygen generator, a device that produces breathable air through a chemical reaction. The canister overheated, flames erupted, dense acrid smoke filled the module. The crew scrambled to extinguish it. They grabbed fire extinguishers. They sealed off compartments. They worked in near total darkness, surrounded by smoke, unable to see, barely able to breathe. The fire burned for about 90 seconds. Not long by Earth standards, but in space 90 seconds is an eternity. If the fire had spread to the oxygen supply tanks, the entire station could have exploded. If the crew hadn't been able to contain it, they would have had to evacuate, cramming into the Soyuz capsule and abandoning the station. If the smoke had overwhelmed them before they could act, they would have suffocated. They survived, barely. But the incident revealed just how vulnerable space stations are. One malfunction, one spark, one overheated wire, and everything can go catastrophically wrong. The ISS now has advanced fire detection and suppression systems. Crew members train regularly for fire emergencies. They practice sealing off modules, donning breathing masks, locating fire extinguishers in zero gravity. But the fear remains, because fire in space is not just a threat to equipment, it's a threat to the air itself. And without air, there is no life. Then there's the risk of decompression. The ISS is pressurized to about the same level as sea level on Earth. Inside, astronauts breathe normally. Outside, the vacuum of space. No air, no pressure, just emptiness. The walls of the station are designed to withstand this pressure difference, but they're not invincible. A micrometeorite, a tiny fragment of rock or metal, traveling at 28,000 kilometers per hour, can puncture the hull. A collision with space debris can tear a hole in a module. A faulty seal can slowly leak air into the void. If the breach is small, the crew might have time to patch it. They carry repair kits, sealant, tape, tools. They've practiced this scenario in training. But if the breach is large, if it happens suddenly, the air rushes out, the pressure drops, and the crew has only seconds to react. In a rapid decompression, the air in your lungs is pulled outward. If you hold your breath, your lungs can rupture. If you breathe normally, you have a little more time, maybe 15 seconds before you lose consciousness. After that, you have about 90 seconds before brain damage becomes irreversible. 2 minutes and you're gone. There are emergency procedures. Astronauts are trained to move quickly to the nearest module and seal the hatch behind them, isolating the breach. They wear pressure suits during spacewalks. They monitor the station's air pressure constantly. But the reality is this: if something catastrophic happens, if the breach is too large, if the reaction is too slow, there may be no way to survive. Space is unforgiving. And then there's space debris. As of recent estimates, there are more than 34,000 pieces of trackable debris in orbit around Earth. Old satellites, spent rocket stages, fragments from collisions and explosions. They're moving at speeds that make bullets look slow. A fleck of paint traveling at orbital velocity can hit with the force of a grenade. The ISS has to maneuver regularly to avoid debris. Mission Control monitors the orbits of every known object. When a collision risk is detected, the crew fires the station's thrusters, nudging it into a slightly different orbit. Sometimes they have just hours to prepare, sometimes less. There have been close calls, objects passing within a few kilometers. Objects that, if the trajectory had been slightly different, would have struck the station directly. And not all debris is trackable. Objects smaller than 10 centimeters often go undetected. They're too small to see from the ground, but they're still large enough to cause catastrophic damage. In 2016, a tiny chip of debris, likely no bigger than a grain of sand, struck a window on the ISS. It left a crater several millimeters wide. The window held, but it was weakened. It had to be replaced, a few millimeters. That's all that stood between the crew and disaster. Astronauts don't talk about this much, not publicly, not in a way that would scare people. But they know. They live with the knowledge that at any moment something too small to see, too fast to avoid, could end everything. And still they go. Because the alternative, staying on the ground, never seeing the earth from above, never touching the edge of the unknown, feels worse. One astronaut described it this way: "Space is dangerous, it's always been dangerous, and it always will be. But danger isn't the same as impossibility. We take precautions, we train, we prepare, and then we go. Not because it's safe, but because it's worth it." So, tonight as you lie in bed, safe beneath the blanket of the atmosphere, think about them. The astronauts floating in the dark, surrounded by invisible radiation, vulnerable to fire, to decompression, to debris moving faster than sound. They're not fearless, they're afraid. But they've learned to carry that fear quietly without letting it stop them. Because courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to move forward despite it. And maybe that's the real lesson of space exploration. Not that the universe is safe, but that we can survive it anyway. Carefully, deliberately, with respect for the danger and determination to keep going. But even with all the precautions, even with all the training, there comes a moment when every astronaut must face the hardest part of the journey. Not the launch, not the work, not even the danger, but the return. The moment when they leave the weightlessness behind and fall back toward the planet that made them. And when they land, when their feet touch solid ground again, they discover that their bodies have forgotten how to stand. You've been floating for 6 months. Your body has forgotten what it means to stand. Your bones have thinned. Your muscles have weakened. Your heart has grown smaller. And now, you're about to fall back to Earth at 25 times the speed of sound, wrapped in a fireball, trusting that a parachute will open and that your body will remember how to survive gravity. This is the return, the hardest part. Not because of the descent, but because of what happens after you land, when you try to stand, and your legs refuse. Coming home is supposed to be the easy part, the celebration, the reunion, the moment when you step back onto solid ground, and everything returns to normal. But for astronauts, normal doesn't come back quickly. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all. The human body adapts to space. It has to. But in doing so, it forgets Earth. The descent begins with a gentle push. The Soyuz capsule separates from the ISS. Thrusters fire, slowing the spacecraft just enough to drop it out of orbit. It's a controlled fall, carefully calculated, aimed at a specific patch of desert in Kazakhstan. For the first few minutes, it feels almost peaceful. The capsule drifts. The astronauts float inside, one last moment of weightlessness. But then, the atmosphere begins. At about 120 kilometers above the Earth, the capsule hits the upper layers of air. Not much air, just enough to create friction. And friction creates heat. The outside of the capsule begins to glow. Orange, red, white. The heat shield, made of ablative material, burns away layer by layer, carrying the heat with it. Inside, the temperature rises, not dangerously but noticeably. The astronauts can feel it, a warmth spreading through the walls, a reminder that they're no longer in the cold vacuum of space. And then gravity returns. Not gently, not gradually, all at once. At the peak of re-entry, astronauts experience forces up to 4 times their body weight. 4 Gs. It's not as much as during launch, but after months of weightlessness, it feels immense. Your chest compresses. Your arms feel impossibly heavy. Your head sinks back into the seat. Breathing becomes difficult, labored. You have to focus deliberately on pulling air into your lungs. One astronaut described it as feeling like an elephant was sitting on his chest. Another said it felt like drowning on dry land. Your body, which has spent months floating effortlessly, is suddenly being crushed by its own weight. And then the parachute deploys. The capsule jerks violently, slows, and begins its final descent toward the ground. When the capsule hits, it hits hard. Even with the parachute, even with retro rockets firing just before impact, the landing is brutal, a solid thud that rattles your bones. Your head snaps forward, your body slams into the straps, and then silence. The hatch opens, Sunlight pours in, fresh air, the smell of grass dust earth, sounds you haven't heard in months, wind birds' voices, and you try to stand, but you can't. Your legs, which have spent 6 months doing almost nothing, refuse to support your weight. Your muscles have atrophied, your bones have weakened, your cardiovascular system, which has been working in an environment with no gravity, can't pump blood upward fast enough. You stand, or try to, and the world tilts. Blood rushes from your head to your legs. Your vision narrows, goes dark around the edges. You feel dizzy, nauseous, unsteady. And if you're not careful, if you don't sit back down immediately, you faint. This is called orthostatic intolerance, the inability to stand without dizziness or fainting. And it affects almost every astronaut who returns from a long-duration mission. On Earth, when you stand, your body automatically adjusts. Blood vessels in your legs constrict, preventing too much blood from pooling there. Your heart rate increases slightly to maintain blood flow to the brain. It's an unconscious process, so automatic you never think about it. But in space, your body stops doing this. There's no need. Blood doesn't pool in your legs because there's no gravity to pull it there. So the reflexes that regulate blood pressure during standing reflexes you've had since you learned to walk gradually fade. And when you return to Earth, they don't come back immediately. Astronauts returning from the ISS are typically carried out of the capsule on stretchers, not because they're injured, but because standing is dangerous. They're taken to a medical tent, examined, monitored, given time to adjust. Some can stand after a few hours, others need days. Peggy Whitson, who holds the record for the most time spent in space by an American astronaut, over 665 days, across multiple missions, described returning to Earth as feeling like she was made of lead. Every movement required immense effort. Walking felt like wading through mud. Even sitting upright was exhausting. She said the hardest part wasn't the physical weakness, it was the frustration. The knowledge that her body used to be able to do these things effortlessly, and now it couldn't. And then there's the strange phenomenon of dropping things. After months in space, astronauts develop habits. When you let go of an object in microgravity, it stays where you left it. It doesn't fall. So you stop catching things. You stop placing objects carefully on tables. You just release them. And they hover, but on Earth objects fall. Astronauts returning from space frequently drop things in their first few days back. Cups, phones, tools. They let go expecting the object to stay, and it crashes to the floor. Their reflexes have been reprogrammed, and it takes time to reprogram them back. One astronaut described pouring a glass of water, setting the pitcher down in midair, and watching it fall. He knew it would fall. Intellectually, he understood gravity, but his body had forgotten. It's disorienting, humbling, a reminder that even the simplest actions require the brain and body to work together in ways we take for granted. And then there's the issue of balance, the vestibular system. The part of the inner ear responsible for balance has to recalibrate. In space, it learned to function without gravity. Now, it has to relearn the old rules. For the first few days, maybe weeks, astronauts experience vertigo. They turn their heads and feel like the room is spinning. They walk and feel like they're tilting even when they're upright. They reach for handholds that aren't there. Some astronauts describe feeling drunk, stumbling, off balance, unable to walk in a straight line. It's temporary. The brain adapts. But during that transition, the world feels unstable, unreliable, as if the ground itself is shifting beneath your feet. Scott Kelly, who spent nearly a year aboard the ISS, the longest single spaceflight by an American astronaut, described his return as one of the most physically painful experiences of his life. His feet hurt. The skin, which hadn't touched the ground in a year, was soft, sensitive. Walking felt like stepping on broken glass. His joints ached. His spine, which had stretched in microgravity, compressed back to its normal length. The process was excruciating. He said it took weeks before he could walk normally. Months before, he felt like himself again. And even years later, some things never fully returned. His bone density improved, but didn't fully recover. His muscles rebuilt, but not to their pre-flight strength. The body remembers space, even after its return to Earth. And then there's the psychological adjustment. Astronauts spend months looking out the window at the Earth, watching continents drift by, seeing storms swirl rivers, glow cities shine. They see the planet as a whole, fragile, beautiful, unified, and then they come back. And they're standing in a grocery store surrounded by fluorescent lights and shelves of cereal, and it feels absurd, trivial. Like the concerns of daily life are impossibly small compared to what they've seen. Some astronauts describe feeling disconnected, out of place, like they've returned to a world that doesn't quite make sense anymore. Others describe a deep aching gratitude for gravity, for air, for the simple grounding weight of their own bodies. One astronaut said that after returning from space, she spent hours just sitting outside, feeling the sun on her face, listening to the wind in the trees. Things she used to ignore. Things that after months in a metal tube felt like miracles. But the readjustment isn't just physical or psychological, it's social. For 6 months, astronauts have been living with the same small group of people, eating together, working together, sleeping in adjacent compartments. They've developed rhythms, routines, inside jokes, a shared language that no one else understands. And then they come home. And their families who have been living their own lives have their own routines, their own inside jokes, their own language. The astronaut has been gone, present in video calls, yes, but absent in all the ways that matter. And now they're back. But they don't quite fit into the life that continued without them. Children have grown, relationships have shifted, the world has moved on, and the astronaut has to find their place in it again. Some marriages survive this transition, some don't. Some friendships deepen, others fade. It's hard, harder than the physical recovery, because you can measure bone density, you can track muscle mass, but you can't measure the distance between who you were before you left and who you are now. Space changes you. Not just your body, but your perspective, your priorities, your sense of what matters. And coming home means integrating that change into a world that, for the most part, hasn't changed at all. One astronaut described it this way: in space, you spend months looking at the Earth and thinking about how beautiful it is, how fragile, how precious. And then you come back and people are arguing about parking spaces and politics and things that feel so small, and you want to grab them and say, "Don't you see we're all on the same planet? We're all in this together." But you can't, because they haven't seen what you've seen, and you can't make them understand. So astronauts carry it quietly: the knowledge, the perspective, the weight of having left and returned. And over time, the body heals. The bones strengthen, the muscles rebuild, the balance returns. But the memory of floating, that stays. Many astronauts say they dream of weightlessness for years afterward. They wake up expecting to float and feel the mattress beneath them and remember they're back, they're home, they're bound to the Earth again. And some part of them misses it, the floating, the freedom, the sense of being untethered from the weight that defines us. But another part of them is grateful for gravity, for the pull that keeps us grounded, for the weight that reminds us every moment that we belong here. So, tonight as you lie in bed, feeling the mattress beneath you, the weight of your own body pressing down, maybe you'll think of them. The astronauts who returned, who learned to stand again, who rebuilt their strength step by step until they could walk without stumbling. They came back different, changed, carrying something no one else can see, but they came back. And maybe that's the real story of spaceflight. Not the leaving, but the returning. The willingness to let your body break down, to float through danger, to live in isolation, and then to come home. To relearn weight, to rebuild, to stand. Because in the end, we're not made for space. We're made for Earth, for gravity, for the ground beneath our feet. But we go anyway. We push beyond our limits. We float. And when we return, we carry the memory of weightlessness with us. A quiet reminder that we are capable of more than we think. That the body, fragile as it is, can adapt to almost anything. That home is not just a place, but a feeling. A pull. A weight that calls us back no matter how far we drift. There's a moment after you've returned from space when you wake up in the middle of the night and forget where you are. Your body feels heavy, pressed into the mattress, and for a split second, you panic. Something's wrong. You're being pulled down. And then you remember gravity, you're home, and you don't know whether to feel relieved or sad. This is what astronauts carry with them long after they've landed. Not just the physical changes, not just the weakened bones or the memories of floating meals, but something deeper, a shift in the way they see the world, a longing for something most of us will never experience, the feeling of being weightless, free, untethered from the planet that made us. We've traveled together through the story of astronauts, the humans who learned to float. We've watched them launch into the void, their bodies pressed into their seats by forces they can barely withstand. We've seen them adapt to weightlessness, their arms floating in front of them as they sleep, their faces swelling with fluid that no longer knows which way to flow. We've watched them struggle with nausea in those first days, vomiting into bags, tears pooling on their eyes instead of falling. We've seen them eat from pouches, drink through straws, wash with damp towels, and use toilets that require them to strap themselves down just to perform the most basic human function. We've felt their loneliness, the ache of being 250 miles above everyone they love, the strange beauty of the overview effect, seeing the Earth as a fragile blue sphere, realizing that all of humanity is together on that tiny rock spinning through the void. We've understood their fear, the invisible radiation passing through their bodies, the constant threat of fire, of decompression of debris moving faster than bullets, the knowledge that space is not empty, but filled with danger that doesn't announce itself. And we've witnessed their return, the brutal re-entry, the difficulty of standing, the frustration of dropping things because their bodies forgot that gravity exists, the long, painful process of relearning how to be human on Earth again. But here's the thing. Despite all of this, the physical pain, the isolation, the danger, the difficulty of coming home, when you ask astronauts if they'd do it again, almost all of them say yes, without hesitation. Why? What is it about floating that makes all of this worth it? Perhaps it's because floating, even for a brief moment, changes the way you understand yourself. On Earth, we are defined by weight, by the pull of gravity, by the fact that we are always constantly being held down. We walk, we stand, we lie down, but we never escape the force that shapes every moment of our existence. In space, that force disappears, and for the first time, you experience your body not as something heavy, but as something light, not as something anchored, but as something free. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, but it's transformative. Astronauts often describe the experience of floating as the closest they have ever come to pure freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, not freedom from danger, but freedom from the one constant that has defined human existence since the beginning, the pull of the Earth. And once you've felt that freedom, once you've lived without weight, you carry the memory of it forever. It changes the way you think about movement, about possibility, about what it means to be human. Some astronauts say that after returning from space, they see gravity differently. Not as a constraint, but as a gift. The thing that holds us to the planet. The thing that keeps us together. The thing that allows us to walk on solid ground, to feel the wind on our faces, to hug the people we love without drifting away. Others say they miss the weightlessness for the rest of their lives. They dream about it. They wake up and reach for a wall to push off from, only to remember they're on Earth now. They're bound again. But maybe that's the real lesson here. Maybe the gift of floating isn't that it frees us from gravity. It's that it helps us see gravity for what it truly is. Not a burden, not a limitation, but a connection, a pull that binds us to the earth, to each other, to the place we come from. Because in the end, we are not made for the void. We are made for the ground, for the air, for the weight of our own bodies pressing us into the world. But we are also made to wonder, to push beyond, to ask, what if, and then build rockets to find out. Humanity has always been this way. We've always looked up at the stars and felt a pull, not gravity, but something else. Curiosity, longing, the desire to see what's out there, to go where we don't belong and survive anyway. The first humans who looked at the night sky didn't see constellations. They saw questions. They saw mystery. And they spent generations trying to understand it, mapping the stars, tracking the planets, building myths to explain the lights that moved across the darkness. And then, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin strapped himself into a metal capsule and let a rocket carry him beyond the atmosphere. He orbited the Earth once, just once, 108 minutes. And when he returned, he said, "The Earth is blue. How wonderful. It is amazing." 64 years later, astronauts are still going, still floating, still looking back at the Earth and seeing the same blue wonder that Gagarin saw. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the reason we keep going to space, despite the cost, despite the danger, despite the difficulty, is because it reminds us of something we forget when we're on the ground. That we are small, that the Earth is fragile, that the atmosphere that keeps us alive is thinner than the skin of an apple, that all of human history, every war, every empire, every achievement, every failure has happened on a tiny sphere, floating in an ocean of darkness, and that despite all our differences, we are all fundamentally on the same journey, spinning through space together, held to the same planet by the same force, breathing the same air, looking up at the same stars. Astronauts see this in a way the rest of us can't. They see the Earth without borders. They see cities glowing like clusters of light. They see storms swirling over oceans. They see the curvature of the horizon, the thin blue line of the atmosphere, the blackness beyond. And they come back changed. Not broken, not damaged, but different. Carrying a perspective that's hard to put into words, but impossible to forget. One astronaut said it this way: "Before I went to space, I thought the Earth was big, infinite, unchangeable. But when you see it from above, you realize how small it is, how delicate. And you think this is all we have, this fragile little planet, and we have to take care of it, because there's nowhere else to go." Maybe that's the real gift of spaceflight, not the technology, not the science, but the perspective, the reminder that we are all in this together, that the Earth is our home, and that home is worth protecting. So, tonight as you drift towards sleep, think about them. The astronauts who left the ground and learned to float, who lived in a place where up and down are just suggestions, who ate from pouches and slept strapped to walls and watched the Earth spin beneath them 16 times a day. They went because we asked them to, because we needed to know if humans could survive out there. And they proved that we can, not easily, not without cost, but we can. And in doing so, they showed us something important, that the body, fragile as it is also resilient, that it can adapt to places it was never meant to go, that it can endure weightlessness and radiation and isolation and still come home, still stand, still remember what it means to be human. But maybe more than that, they showed us that we are capable of dreaming beyond our limits, of reaching for the impossible, of looking at the stars and saying, yes, we can go there, and then going. Because that's what humans do. We push, we explore, we float, and when we return, we bring back stories, perspective, a quiet understanding that the world is bigger than we thought, and smaller, and more precious. So maybe you'll never go to space. Maybe you'll never feel the sensation of weightlessness, never see the Earth from above, never watch the sun rise 16 times in a single day. But you can carry the lesson with you, the knowledge that we are all astronauts in a way, All of us traveling through space together on this small, spinning planet. All of us held by the same gravity. All of us breathing the same air. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's the real gift. Not the floating, but the returning, the coming home, the rediscovery of weight, the gratitude for the pull that keeps us here. Because in the end, gravity is not a burden, it's a blessing. It's what holds us together, what reminds us every moment that we belong. And the astronauts who learned to float, they know this better than anyone. They left. They drifted. They saw the Earth from a distance most of us will never reach. And then they came home. And they were grateful. Sleep well. Dream gently. And maybe let yourself float for a while. In your dreams, you're weightless, free, untethered. And when you wake, when you feel the mattress beneath you, the weight of your body pressing down, remember you're home. You're held. You're exactly where you're meant to be. Good night. Thank you for drifting with us tonight through the quiet story of astronauts, the humans who learned to float. If these journeys into the gentle mysteries of science bring you comfort, we'd love to have you return. There are more stories waiting, more wonders to explore softly, more questions to ask in whispers. Until then, rest well. And remember, even in your dreams, you're still traveling through space. We all are, together.